I'm an old man now, days away from my 98th birthday. For the better part of a century, a secret has lived in my heart, silent, heavy, and unspoken. I sit in my frayed armchair by the window each evening, watching the sun melt into the horizon as dust dances in the golden light. On the side table rests a rusted tin box filled with memories, a black and white photograph of a platoon in happier times, a tarnished purple heart medal, and a yellowed envelope addressed in a familiar hand. I trace the cursive letters of the name on that envelope with a trembling finger, my eyes stinging with tears that have waited a lifetime to fall. Every night for the last 70-odd years I have thought about burning that letter, or burying it, or finally opening it to set my soul free. But I never had the courage. The things we carry from war are not just medals and scars, there are also ghosts of choices we can't undo and words we never got to say. In my case, it's one unsent letter and the story behind it, a story I've never told a soul, not my late wife who saw me bolt upright from nightmares, nor my son who once caught me weeping over that old tin box, nor even my own conscience which I've tried to numb with time. Tonight, however, the silence must be broken. The weight of this secret has bowed my shoulders and etched deep lines into my brow. I can feel the end of my road drawing near. The doctors don't say it outright, but I know. Perhaps that's why the ghosts of the past have grown restless, urging me that if I don't speak now, the truth will die with me. And some truths demand to be heard, even if it takes a lifetime. So here I am, talking aloud to the emptiness of my living room, to the motes of dust swirling in the last light of day. My voice cracks from disuse and emotion as I begin. This is the story I have kept locked within me since the war, the story of how I failed my dearest friend, and how I've carried his final wish in my pocket all these years without fulfilling it. It's time to finally face the past, time to ask for forgiveness from him and from myself. I close my eyes and let the years peel away. In my mind, I am 19 again, a fresh-faced private standing on the train platform in 1943 with a duffel bag at my feet and fear hidden beneath my eager grin. That was the day I met Henry Morrison. Henry was a tall, lanky farm boy from Kansas who had never seen the ocean until the Army shipped us off to basic training. I was a street-smart kid from Brooklyn who thought I'd seen it all. We were an unlikely pair, ribbing each other endlessly. He teased my fast-talking city slang. I joked about his slow drawl and how he said y'all to even the officers. We became fast friends in those few short weeks of training, drawn together by youthful bravado and the unspoken understanding that we were both terrified of what lay ahead. By the time we crossed the Atlantic and found ourselves in the midst of a war-torn Europe, Henry and I were as close as brothers. We fought shoulder to shoulder through the hedgerows of France and the bitter cold of the Ardennes. I can still remember the crunch of snow under our boots during the Battle of the Bulge, the distant thunder of artillery at night, and Henry's whispered prayers in the dark when he thought no one could hear. "Just get me home to my Martha and the baby on the way," he would plead softly into the frigid air. Martha was his young wife back home, pregnant with their first child. In the damp foxholes under skies lit by tracer fire, I often heard Henry murmur his unborn child's name. If it was a boy, Charles, after his father. If a girl, he said, maybe Grace. Those small dreams kept him alive through the horror, gave him a beacon of hope. They did the same for me, even though I had no one waiting back home except my aging parents. War, however, has a cruel way of shattering even the most fervent prayers. In March 1945, as the war neared its end, our unit was tasked with pushing into a small German village on the Rhine's east bank. Rumors whispered that the enemy was on its last legs, perhaps ready to surrender, but that made them no less dangerous. The morning was foggy as we crept into the silent streets, rifles clutched tightly to our chests. I remember the smell of wet earth and smoke, and the way my heart pounded like a drum in my ears. Henry was just a step behind me, close enough that I could hear him humming a shaky tune under his breath to calm his nerves. The crack of a rifle shot tore through the air, and chaos erupted. A sniper hidden in the bell tower of a church spire had opened fire on us. We scattered behind stone walls and abandoned carts. Adrenaline ignited in my veins. I pressed my back flat against a cold brick wall and glanced over at Henry, who had taken cover behind a rain barrel across the street. Our eyes met. In that split second, I saw the familiar flicker of fear in his face that likely mirrored my own. I gestured frantically for him to stay down. My mind was racing. We needed to locate the sniper. I was one of the better shots in our platoon, and my hands steadied as I raised my rifle, scanning the church tower through my sights. I steadied my aim on a flicker of movement behind the slatted wooden shutters of the tower. My finger tightened on the trigger. A shot rang out, but it wasn't mine. I saw Henry jolt backward and collapse from behind the barrel, his rifle clattering to the cobblestones. For an instant, time stopped. My breath caught in my throat as a scream I didn't realize was mine ripped through the chaos. "Henry!" I abandoned my cover without thinking. Bullets whizzed by my ears as I sprinted toward him. Somehow, by a miracle or sheer luck, I slid to the ground by his side, untouched. Henry was down, sprawled on his back. A crimson stain was spreading across the front of his dusty field jacket. He had been shot just below the collarbone. "No, no, no," I gasped, pressing my hands desperately against the wound, as if I could plug the life from leaking out of him. His face was ashen, lips trembling as he fought to breathe. Those pale blue eyes that always brimmed with quiet humor were wide with terror now. He was going into shock. "It's okay, Henry. You're going to be okay, you hear me?" I lied through my teeth, choking on each word. Behind me, I vaguely heard the crack of another rifle, one of our guys taking out the sniper at last, but all I could focus on was my friend. Henry's shaking hand gripped my arm with surprising strength. His other hand fumbled at his chest, and I realized he was trying to reach into his jacket pocket. I plunged my fingers in and drew out a folded letter, stained with his blood at the edges. Henry's voice was barely a whisper above the din. "Just a letter. For Martha," he wheezed. Blood flecked his lips and his breathing came in wet, shallow gulps. "Please, give it to her and tell her I love—" His words dissolved into a gurgle. I cradled his head in my lap as tears blurred my vision. "I will, Henry, I promise. I promise, you just hang on," I pleaded, my voice cracking. He gave a faint nod, a slight easing of the fear in his eyes. For a moment, in the noise of distant gunfire and shouting, everything fell away except us two. I could feel his life slipping, like trying to cup water in my hands. Henry opened his mouth as if to speak again, but only a soft exhale escaped. His hand on my arm went limp. I felt a terrible stillness come over him. My best friend died there in my arms on the cold ground of that nameless German village, with dawn breaking pale and heartless over the rooftops. I remember screaming his name, shaking him, refusing to accept that he was gone. By the time the medics reached us, I was rocking back and forth, clutching that bloodied letter to my chest, unwilling to let him go. That day, something inside me cracked. War had taken many things from us by then, our innocence, our comrades, our youthful joy, but with Henry's last breath, it took away my faith. The world grew quiet in a way I'd never felt, even as battle raged on around us. They pried his body from my arms eventually, and I stumbled through the rest of that operation in a numb haze. Somehow I survived the war's final months on sheer inertia, but in truth, a part of me never left that village square where Henry fell. When victory was finally declared and I was shipped back home, I carried Henry's letter pressed against my chest like a second heartbeat. The war ended for the world, but it did not end for me, not with that unfinished duty looming. As the troop ship cut across the Atlantic and the Statue of Liberty came into view, I felt only a hollow ache. I had survived when so many did not. And in my breast pocket, I held the last words of a dead man, a message I had sworn to deliver. In the summer of 1945, a few months after VE Day, I found myself standing on a dusty country road in Kansas, just outside the Morrison family farm. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows of oak trees across the yard. My heart thundered in my chest as I gazed at the little farmhouse where Henry's Martha lived. I saw a figure on the porch, a young woman in a faded yellow dress, holding a swaddled infant in her arms. Even from a distance, I could see how she gently rocked the baby, her head bowed. Martha. And that must have been their child, born a few months after Henry's death. A son, I would later learn, whom she named Charles after Henry's father. The sight undid me. My throat clenched and tears welled up. She looked so small and alone, a new mother widowed by a war an ocean away. I wanted desperately to walk through the front gate, up the steps, and hand her the letter that I had guarded with my life. I wanted to tell her how bravely Henry had fought, how his last words had been of her and the baby, how he loved them more than anything. I rehearsed the words in my head 1,000 times while standing there, my feet like lead. But every time I tried to move, shame and fear pinned me in place. How could I face her? How could I tell her that I had survived and Henry hadn't? Irrational as it sounds, I felt as if I had failed Henry, that I had no right to deliver his loving words when I had broken my promise to keep him safe. The sniper's bullet may have killed him, but it was my hesitation that allowed it to happen, or so I convinced myself in those days. I don't know how long I stood by the fence, watching Martha hold her baby and quietly weep into the fading daylight. Eventually, her sister or neighbor, someone, came out and gently led her inside. Dusk was creeping in, fireflies beginning to flicker in the fields. I remained frozen, the letter burning in my pocket, until the windows of the farmhouse glowed warm and yellow in the blue evening. In the end, I turned around and walked away. I never knocked on the door. I told myself that mailing the letter with a note would have to suffice, but I never even managed to do that. Instead, I fled, back to my own family in New York, carrying a letter that was not mine to keep. Back home, life moved on in fits and starts. I married a few years later, worked as a mechanic, raised a son, and tried to bury the war and its ghosts in the deepest pit of my mind. To the outside world, I was just another returning veteran trying to be a good husband and father. But Henry's letter never left me. It stayed hidden in that old tin box along with my medals. Occasionally, I'd take it out late at night when my wife was asleep and just hold it under the light, never reading the words inside, but feeling the weight of what I hadn't done. Every time I thought of Martha and little Charlie in Kansas, my chest tightened with a mix of guilt and cowardice. So I let the years slip by, one after another, always finding an excuse to put it off. They've moved on. My interference would just reopen wounds. Or, it's too late now. What difference would it make? The truth is, I was afraid. I was a coward in the one way that truly mattered. I had faced enemy fire and marched through hell, but I couldn't face the widow of my best friend to deliver his final message. That realization haunted me more than any nightmare of the battlefield. Years rolled on. I grew older, my hair turning silver, then white. My son had children of his own, and I became Grandpa Joe to two curious little ones who could never imagine the things I had seen. Outwardly, I was the picture of a content retiree, telling harmless war anecdotes about muddy boots and cold rations at the VFW hall, but never the real stories. Never Henry, never the letter. That remained locked away. After my wife passed and the quiet of the house settled in, the memories I'd long tried to bury clawed their way back to the surface. I would wake up at 2 a.m. in a cold sweat, the echo of Henry's voice in my ears. In those nightmares, I was back in that village, watching him fall again and again. Sometimes I dreamed of him standing at the foot of my bed, not as the bleeding young man I last saw, but whole and solemn. He would look at me with disappointment, saying nothing. But in my heart, I always heard the question, "Why didn't you give her my letter?" On the nights like that, I'd wander into the living room, open the tin box, and stare at the envelope under the lamplight. I'd run my thumb over Henry's handwriting, strong, neat letters spelling out, "My dearest Martha." I imagined all the things that letter might say, perhaps words of comfort for her, descriptions of mundane camp life to make her smile, or tender lines for the baby he had yet to meet. I never opened it. It was not mine to read, but the weight of those unknown words pressed on me. Sometimes I wondered if by keeping the letter I had done more harm than good. Maybe Martha eventually found her own peace, not knowing what Henry's final thoughts had been. Would showing up decades later only renew her grief? These doubts were my shield against taking action. They let me postpone my duty year after year. But as my own mortality crept closer, those excuses began to ring hollow. It took many more years, too many, and a brush with my own mortality to finally shake me awake. Last spring, I had a small heart attack. It laid me up in the hospital for a week, and as I lay in a sterile bed with tubes in my arms, I realized how easily I could slip away with my promise unkept. The thought terrified me more than death itself. The very first night I was back home from the hospital, I hobbled straight to that tin box, pulled out Henry's letter with unsteady hands, and cried. I cried like the 19-year-old boy I once was, all the grief and guilt pouring out as I pressed that letter to my heart and begged aloud for Henry and Martha to forgive me. I knew then what I had to do. Fear or not, shame or not, I had to try to make it right, even if it was nearly 80 years too late. It took me another few months after that realization and the gentle insistence of my own grandson, but I finally tracked down Henry's family. Martha had passed away some years ago, but her son, Henry's son, Charles, was very much alive, a grandfather himself now and living in a town not far from that old farm. When I made contact by phone, his voice trembled. He had heard stories about his father's friend Joe all his life, so the moment I said my name, he knew who I was. He invited me to visit. Despite my age and frailty, I was determined to make the journey. I traveled to Kansas on a crisp autumn morning. The day we arrived at a modest farmhouse, my heart pounded like it did back in 1945. An elderly man stood waiting on the porch. It was Charles. I stepped out on unsteady legs. Charles descended the porch steps slowly. For a moment, we simply looked at each other. Two old men connected by a sacrifice made before either of us had gray hair or wrinkles. My throat tightened, and I fumbled for words. "I'm Joe," I managed softly. I was with your father when he—" Before I could finish, Charles closed the distance and gently embraced me. "Thank you for coming," he whispered. In that hug was a warmth and decades of guilt dissolved. I felt Henry's presence in that moment, as if he too pulled us together. We went inside and sat at his kitchen table, beneath walls adorned with framed photographs. Martha, Charles's own children, and a sepia-toned portrait of a young Henry in uniform. My hands trembled as I drew the yellowed envelope out and laid it in front of Charles. "I've kept this for a very long time," I said, voice shaking. "It's a letter your father wrote to your mother. I'm sorry I didn't bring it sooner." Tears blurred my eyes. I promised him I'd deliver it, but I never did. Charles's eyes brimmed with tears as well, but he gave a reassuring nod. His fingers hovered over the envelope as if touching a sacred object. "Thank you, Joe," he whispered. "This means the world to me." He carefully broke the seal and unfolded the fragile pages. After a moment, he asked gently, "Would you read it with me? I think I'd like to hear it in your voice." I swallowed hard, hardly trusting my voice, but I agreed. I unfolded the letter. The paper crackled in my grasp. Taking a steadying breath, I began to read Henry's final words aloud, my voice soft and reverent. "My dearest Martha," I read. "I hope this letter finds you safe and well. We're somewhere in Germany now. By the time you read this, I pray the war will be over, and I'll be on my way home to you. There's not a day I don't think of you and our little one. How I wish I could be there to see our baby's first smile, to hold you in my arms and never let go. I carry your last letter in my breast pocket, and I read it each night before I sleep. It still smells like home. I even imagine I can smell your apple pie on Sundays. Things are tough here, but don't you worry. I've got Joe watching my back and we all take care of each other. I have faith I'll be back home to you soon, but if for some reason I don't make it—" My voice caught at these words and I had to pause as a tear rolled down my cheek. "If I don't make it, know that I am with you in spirit, always. Raise our child to know that their daddy loved them more than anything in this world. I'm fighting to make the world a place where our little one can grow up safe and free. Please give them all my love, and keep some for yourself, my darling. I love you with all my heart, Martha. Yours forever, Henry." By the time I finished reading, my voice had nearly given out. Both Charles and I were openly crying. The letter trembled in my grasp as I gently refolded it. Charles let out a shuddering breath and covered his face with his hand. "Thank you," he whispered. This means the world to me. To know his words, to feel a piece of him after all this time." He wiped his eyes and reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "You did the right thing in the end, Joe," he said gently, "even if it took a lifetime. Thank you. Mom would have been so grateful." In that moment, decades of weight lifted off my shoulders. I felt light, as if Henry himself had forgiven me in the echo of his son's words. We spent the rest of the afternoon sharing stories, me about Henry, and him about the life Henry's sacrifice had given him. We laughed through tears, feeling like family. As I left, Charles pulled me into a tight hug. "You'll always be part of our family," he murmured. I couldn't speak past the lump in my throat, but I managed a smile. On the long drive home, under a sky painted with the pink and orange of twilight, I felt at peace for the first time in a lifetime. The promise had been kept. Henry's voice could finally rest, and so could my weary soul. I closed my eyes as the fields rolled by, picturing two young soldiers laughing under a summer sun, their whole lives ahead of them. And though tears still wet my cheeks, they were not tears of regret anymore, but of relief and a bittersweet joy.